All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the latest installment of ASM's Meet the Policymaker series. This webinar series from ASM is designed to connect the ASM community with policymakers whose work intersects with the microbial sciences. I'm Amalia Corby, ASM's Director of Federal Affairs. We're so happy you all could join us today. We have really good attendance from a global audience, and so I think our guests are very excited to talk to you all and share the work that they do. Combating AMR is a top priority for ASM and our members. Our public policy and advocacy team advocates for a multifaceted approach to AMR, from basic research to drug and diagnostics development to surveillance and building laboratory capacity around the world. This afternoon, we're pleased to host Jomana Musmar, Sarah McClelland, and Haley Krem from the Presidential Advisory Council on Combating Antibiotic-Resistant Bacteria to speak about their work and how ASM members can get involved. The PACCARB advises the U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services regarding programs and policies intended to reduce or combat antimicrobial resistance. PACCARB supports a One Health approach to combating AMR and evaluates and supports programs across animal, environmental, and human health. PACCARB members come from industry, academia, public health, and more, and include ASM members like ASM past President Robin Patel currently. Dr. Musmar serves as the Executive Director of PACCARB, as well as the Deputy Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Office of Infectious Diseases and HIV/AIDS Policy in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. I will not say that 5 times fast, that is a long title. Prior to joining the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health, Dr. Musmar managed the National Biodefense Science Board. Dr. Musmar is renowned for her exceptional leadership and collaborative approach to problem solving and consensus building, along with a strategic vision and creative ability to navigate complex topics such as AMR and One Health. And we've seen this in her leadership on PACCARB. Sarah McClelland is a health policy analyst and alternate designated federal officer supporting the PACCARB. In her role, Sarah supports the development of all council products, including their most recent recommendation report, a united front, collaborative global leadership to combat AMR. Her other federal activities include supporting the interagency CARB task force. Haley Krem is a committee management officer with the Office of Infectious Disease and HIV/AIDS Policy at HHS. She has been coordinating and supporting the PACCARB since 2019. Haley has spent the last decade working in public health as both a scientific consultant and as a federal employee, and her work has focused on biodefense, hospital and emergency preparedness, and combating AMR. We've received several questions in advance of today's webinar. If time allows, we'll take additional questions from the audience at the end of the presentation. Please enter your questions into the Q&A box on your screen. Note that the PACCARB and this webinar focus on policy approaches to AMR, so we will not be addressing technical questions. However, we do encourage ASM members to sign up for the quarterly AAR Insights and Discussions webinar series, which is more technical in nature. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Musmar.
Maya, thank you so much. And a sincere thank you to everyone at ASM for joining today's policy session and also for inviting us to be part of this session. It's truly an honor, and I'm honored to be here with my team as well to share a little bit about the council, let you know why we exist, our function, what we've produced to date, and how you, most importantly, can be part of the process. So we want to make sure that we get as many scientists and microbiologists that have their voices heard as part of this platform that we have on the council, because this is your ability to share your expertise, share your knowledge and information, and have the government hear all that as they develop policies and next steps to combat AMR, because we still have a long road ahead of us. So we need to make sure that all of your feedback is taken into consideration. So thank you for everyone near and far for being here today, and we'll just get right into it. And full disclosure, I'm getting over something nasty, so if you hear me clear my throat, my apologies in advance, but hopefully I can get through this without a hitch. All right, so as Amaya mentioned, we are in the Office of Infectious Diseases and HIV/AIDS Policy that is within the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health, within the Office of the Secretary at the Department of Health and Human Services. That is a mouthful. But the beauty about our office is that we are truly an office that includes a range of infectious diseases, but also a few of our federal advisory committees, and I'll discuss those in a little bit. So part of our office focuses on HIV/AIDS and the issues related to HIV/AIDS through another presidential advisory committee. We have an advisory committee on blood and tissue safety and availability that's solely dedicated to that purpose and providing recommendations to the Assistant Secretary for Health and the Secretary regarding all things regarding our blood shortage here in the nation in particular. We have our National Vaccine Advisory Committee that works very closely with the other vaccine advisory committees within the United States government. And then lastly, our existence as the Presidential Advisory Council solely dedicated to AMR through a One Health approach. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how we function. Next slide. Okay, so in the United States, many of you know that we have a Federal Advisory Committee structure. The purpose of a Federal Advisory Committee is for the U.S. government to receive advice and recommendations from subject matter experts that aren't within the U.S. government. And the entire point is to have that very transparent, honest, and candid conversation so that these subject matter experts that don't work or have any sort of relationship with the government provide that honest advice so that the government can fully optimize its efforts towards any topic. And as many of you may or may not know, there are actually hundreds of advisory committees across all the departments in the U.S. government. Advisory committees actually go back to the 1700s. So in 1794, in the Whiskey Rebellion, President Washington actually asked for advice regarding the Whiskey Rebellion and the taxes on whiskey. And so that was the kind of informal structure of seeking that external advice on government functions. But then it was formalized in 47 under President Truman when it came to optimizing the operations of the federal government at that time. And so because you have a group of external subject matter experts, there are rules and regulations on how we function so that we can ensure that there's consistency among the different advisory committees that are assigned, that there's no conflicts of interest, and that the work that we do is truly transparent and available to the public, but also gives the government the benefit that it needs, and that is through the Federal Advisory Committee Act. So every advisory committee, the four that I mentioned previously that our office only manages, has to follow the strict rules of the Federal Advisory Committee Act to ensure the integrity and the ethics are maintained as we provide these recommendations to whatever authority Congress mandates. Next slide, please. So just to tell you a little bit about our FACA, which is the PACCARB, the Presidential Advisory Council on Combating Antibiotic-Resistant Bacteria. So back in 2013, there was a Presidential Council on Advancing Science and Technology. This was a separate group in the White House that provided President Obama at the time with advice and recommendations on how we can formalize the U.S. government effort to combat resistance. An executive order was then issued in 2014, which led to three main things: the establishment of a formal federal task force to combat resistance. This is purely internal, and it's composed of several federal agencies. The establishment of a national action plan corresponding with a strategy to combat resistance, and then our existence as a council. Since then, we've done a ton of things as an advisory committee. Our membership is truly One Health in that we have human health, animal health, and environmental health domains covered. That is reflected in our membership, but also in our recommendations and that are in our reports that we have. And if many of you have attended our meetings, you see that all of our conversations try to fold in all three domains to ensure that we cover the gamut of AMR, because you can't focus on one domain without addressing the other areas, given the complexity of antimicrobial resistance and the need to approach it through that One Health perspective. One of the main areas of legislation that codified our council is in the Pandemic and All Hazards Preparedness and Advancing Innovation Act legislation, which we know that ASM also had a big hand in helping out. So we are in executive order, and also we are in legislation as well. All right, so a little bit about who we are. As I mentioned, we do things through a One Health perspective. And the areas that you see here on the screen give you kind of a snapshot of the topics that are in our charter that cover the range of topics that we actually discuss at our meetings. To date, we've held over 23 public meetings and issued about 13 reports with recommendations. Everything is on our website if you'd like to visit it at hhs.gov/PACCARB. The ladies coming up next are going to give you an idea about the types of recommendations that we have pushed forward and hopefully provided some insight to the general public, and then how you could be involved. And I'll turn it over next to Ms. Sarah McClelland.
Thank you so much. Next slide, please. All right, before we get into specifically what the PACCARB has done, I'm going to take things back a little and talk about kind of the current and forecasted burden of AMR globally. I'm sure you all are well aware of these estimates, but if you're not, what's shown in this visual is kind of the global impact of AMR in 2019. The vertical bars show the total number of deaths per 100,000 people attributed to and associated with bacterial AMR in each region. And what that kind of means holistically, or what we see as from the World Bank, is that if not controlled or if not kind of mitigated and strategies aren't put in place, AMR will result in 1 to 3.4 trillion US dollars of annual losses to our gross domestic product by 2030, which is no longer that far away as it is 2025. And then an additional 1 trillion US dollars of loss in healthcare costs by 2050. And according to recent estimates in 2019, we have 1.27 million deaths directly attributed to drug-resistant infections globally. And by 2050, that could be up to as many as 10 million deaths annually. So that's kind of the global burden, financial burden of AMR. But we also have some study, a Lancet study most recently that was published that talks about kind of the mortality of AMR, especially in comparison to other common causes of death. This study was published in September, I think 2 Septembers ago, and kind of has given a broad comprehensive assessment of the global burden of AMR from 1990 to 2021 and also forecasts into 2050. And what we see is that in those forecasts, they're predicting a decline in AMR deaths among children under 5 years old. This mostly is due to adoption of infection prevention measures. However, it's kind of on the other side, the predictions show a concerning rise in AMR deaths among adults over 70, which is particularly troubling given how our global population is aging. So the Lancet study predicts that an estimated next slide. Yes, sorry about that. I just moved right along. An estimated 10.13 million deaths attributed to and associated with AMR could occur globally by 2050. And as you can see, that would outshine deaths due to cancer, cholera, diabetes, and other common causes of death. So becoming really a primary cause of mortality globally. What the study also showed is that the highest burden of this AMR mortality is going to be felt, is forecasted to be felt in South Asia and Latin America. So really lower income or middle income countries. And that again, the largest population that will be affected will be those over 70 years old. Next slide, please. So with those alarming numbers, Jomana alluded to and mentioned a few times the One Health perspective. And we thought this was really important to kind of break down and include. The One Health perspective really recognizes that the health of people and humans is really closely related to the environment and the health of animals. And so we do everything at PACCARB from a One Health perspective. And that's really because AMR isn't found only within human health. It's seen in water systems in our shared environment. It's seen in our animal populations, both agricultural animals and companion animals. So your dogs and cats get resistant infections. And we also see it in our crop agriculture as well. And so it's really imperative that we don't leave those sectors out. While, human health, we're at HHS, is always kind of the primary focus. It's really important to understand that if you only focused on human health when developing strategies and policies to combat AMR, you're missing really 2/3 of where it's coming from and who else is impacted. And so if we really want to have effective policies and practices to combat AMR, we have to really combat it at every front. And that includes within the animal health sector and within our shared environment and environmental health sector. Next slide, please. So getting back a little bit to PACCARB and our reports, as Jomana mentioned, we published 13 reports since our establishment in 2015. And those reports, again, are all publicly available on our website at hhs.gov/PACCARB. Our most recent report came out in May 2024, as you can see on the timeline there. The council also will put out what we call one-page recommendation letters. And these focus on a specific topic. So they're not as broad, kind of tackling more complex topics as the reports are. The most recent one of those was published in August of 2024 and focused on policies and strategies meant to support and bolster the infectious disease workforce. As I'm sure you all are very aware of and familiar with, especially after the pandemic and during the pandemic, our infectious disease workforce has taken a major hit, and we are seeing very low numbers of people entering the force and higher numbers of people leaving due to burnout and other things. And so this letter, along with some of our external federal partners, was really meant to kind of offer the PACCARB perspective on policies that could support and bolster our ID workforce. Next slide, please. In addition, as Jomana mentioned, in 2015, in addition to the creation of the PACCARB, there was the creation of the Interagency CARB Task Force and the development of the first iteration of the U.S. National Action Plan on Combating Antibiotic-Resistant Bacteria. Another mouthful. The National Action Plan is in 5-year iterations, and it really is the roadmap for how federal agencies across the One Health spectrum, so it's a One Health document, how federal agencies are addressing AMR both with their own distinct activities and across agency activities. And this, as I said, it's in 5-year iterations, so it is updated every 5 years. The current iteration is from 2020 to 2025. So the CARB Task Force is actually in the process of creating the next iteration of the National Action Plan. But the National Action Plan is developed by, implemented, and tracked by the Interagency CARB Task Force, which encompasses all the federal agencies that have a stake in combating antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Those agencies largely sit on our council and contribute to our work as PACCARB, but PACCARB itself does not actually implement or track progress towards the National Action Plan. Instead, next slide, please. Thanks. Instead, what we can do is offer advice and recommendation on what new iterations of the National Action Plan can look like. And that's exactly what PACCARB did in 2018. The CARB Task Force asked for their input, and they put out a report, again, publicly available on our website, outlining some additional priorities. In the update from the last National Action Plan, they kept the original 5 goals of the National Action Plan. And so PACCARB offered input and recommendation on kind of new priorities to look at within those 5 goals. And what the council really tried to do in working with the CARB Task Force and outside stakeholders is really identify and acknowledge areas where progress had been made over those first 5 years, and then how we could really continue the work and push the needle for those next 5 years, 2020 to 2025. And so you'll see in this graphic, there were certain recommendations that fell under each of the goals for priorities for consideration for the next iteration of the National Action Plan. But PACCARB also wanted to include some kind of overarching ideas that they thought should be included, whether they didn't fit neatly in one goal or maybe they fit across goals. And you can see those on the bottom of the infograph. The first one being U.S. global leadership. That's really an important priority. It maps very well to Goal 5 of the National Action Plan, which is about our international work, but really, championing and pushing this idea that the U.S. is really a leader in this space policy-wise. The U.S. has done a lot of work, and I think the CARB task force and its work with the PACCARB really demonstrates the beauty of interagency work and the benefit of that. And so taking that experience and being able to be a leader on the global stage is really important. And I think, many people believe that we have a lot to offer in terms of offering support and kind of best practices and learning from our global colleagues as well in that leadership role. I also want to note for the leadership role, as we all know, and I'm sure you all are very familiar with, disease doesn't really know borders. And so not only is it important for the U.S. to remain a leader globally, maintaining those strong relationships and ties with our global partners is really the only way that any efforts to combat AMR are going to be successful, because AMR can cross borders however it pleases. And so we really need to work in a coordinated effort globally to really kind of push the needle on combating AMR. The second thing you'll see there is the environment. And I think this is something that we are still always trying to incorporate better, but we've done a lot of great work in bringing that third piece of the One Health pie into the conversation. We really work closely and have longstanding relationships with our animal health colleagues, but bringing in that environmental piece has kind of been kind of the last step of really actualizing that One Health perspective. And so, the PACCARB really recommended being very intentional about how the environment is incorporated in that next iteration of the National Action Plan. And finally, the broadening of our horizons to include fungal resistance. As you all are probably aware, fungal resistance acts very similarly to bacterial resistance. That's why we have the term antimicrobial resistance, right? It includes both. And so making sure that in that next iteration of the National Action Plan, including fungal resistance in some of our activities was really important. And I'm really happy to say, I think that's been a real success story over the last 5 years. Fungal resistance and fungal pathogens has become pretty much a staple of every conversation we at the PACCARB have. And I know it's become a kind of really well incorporated piece of the work that the federal agencies are doing as well. And with that, I will turn it over to my coworker, Haley, and we can move on to the next slide. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Kind of highlighting more recent reports and moving on from kind of the National Action Plan and the idea of just providing input into the federal response, the PACCARB looks at a wide range of topics as it relates to antimicrobial resistance. So in 2023, the PACCARB produced a report that was focused on pandemic preparedness and really the impact that AMR can have during a public health emergency, really highlighting that AMR is functionally an intensifier, can cause or even worsen a future pandemic. So this report focuses on 4 major areas in which we identified improvements that can strengthen our response. So those were infection prevention, control and stewardship, workforce expansion, data sharing and security, and product innovation. And really a key theme of the report is that these 4 areas need to be strengthened during both steady state, day-to-day conditions, as well as during emergency operations. So if you can bolster these 4 areas during normal conditions, they'll be more resilient when challenged by an emergency. But you really must also have mechanisms in place to strengthen these areas during a pandemic. Additionally, this report highlights the really central role that equity, trust, and communication play during both the lead up to and response to a pandemic. Ultimately, it recommends that these concepts should be applied when implementing all recommendations, as they're really critical for a successful pandemic response. As Sarah mentioned, and as Jomana mentioned, you can read the full narrative as well as the specifics of the 14 recommendations in this report on our website. Next slide, please. And then as Sarah mentioned, our most recent report really focuses in on the global lens needed to fight against antimicrobial resistance. Drug resistance, as we keep mentioning, is a global issue, but that global issue will impact U.S. health. So it's really critical that we have global cooperation and collaboration to address the growing rates of resistance that we see internationally. So this report really highlights that there's a global need to ensure a collective understanding of AMR, the use of consistent and common language, the implementation of actions that address local needs that are driven by local solutions, the use of monitoring and metrics to inform decision-making, and the need for science-driven global AMR targets. The report highlights 4 goals to combat AMR globally. The first is preventing infections, the logic being the prevention of bacterial, fungal, and viral infections helps to holistically combat AMR on multiple fronts by reducing the need to treat with antibiotics or antimicrobials, and therefore lowering the risk for the development of resistance. The second goal is to increase awareness of antimicrobial resistance to drive global action. And it really highlights the link between antimicrobial resistance and its negative impact on major health, social, and economic issues, such as cancer, maternal health, poverty, food security. And really making this connection is intended to drive political will and influence change on a global level. And then our third and fourth goals captured in the report really focus on the development and access of antibiotics, vaccines, diagnostics, other alternatives, and the need to have this development and this access across the globe and across all One Health domains. New innovations need to be combined with stewardship programs, and low and middle income countries must have access to their basic needs, those new and previously existing medicines, diagnostics, and surveillance capacity, because these low and middle income countries need this access to appropriately combat growing rates of resistance. Next slide, please. So really, ultimately, this global AMR report highlights that you cannot address antimicrobial resistance within the confines of a single border. Infections don't respect borders. You're going to hear that a lot from us today. And it really must be addressed collaboratively at a global level. The key principles in this report include prioritizing high consequence pathogens, employing clear and accessible language, engaging local communities, and establishing adaptable global targets that align with local needs are really imperative to provide a framework for a comprehensive and effective global response to antimicrobial resistance. Next slide. So while we've kind of highlighted who we are, what we've done, what we've published reports about in the recent years, I think what could be of particular interest and what we'd really like to kind of focus on in the end here is ways for you as scientists and experts in your own right to get involved. So one of the easiest actions that you can do, but probably with the most impact, is that you can join the council. As Jomana explained earlier, our council is made up of subject matter experts such as yourselves, and you can help directly shape the recommendations that we put out and that we include in our recommendation reports and in our memos. We have positions opening later this year, and we'll have a call for nominations to fill those seats on the council. And another way that you can engage with us and a way to stay abreast of our PACCARB activities, including our new reports and our call for nominees, is by signing up for our Friends of PACCARB mailing list. You can go to our website, you can register for this email subscription, or you can email us at carb@hhs.gov to stay involved in all the work that we're doing. This mailing list is also a great way to stay informed about really one of our core activities, which is our public meetings. Public meetings are really the cornerstone of all of our activities, and every recommendation and report that we've discussed today and that we've put out on our website come from conversations that we've had at our meeting. As a member of the public, you can be invited to speak to the council on an AMR topic. You can speak at our Innovation Spotlight, which is a section that we host at every meeting where a small business, an organization, an individual, or an association can kind of present their innovation that's intended to combat AMR. Or you can come to our meetings and provide public comment, which is really a core function of the PACCARB and of AFACA in general, where it gives members of the public an opportunity to kind of direct and address the council on an AMR topic. So next slide, please. I bring all of this up because this webinar has phenomenal timing in that the PACCARB is hosting our next public meeting on January 28th and 29th. And we're really trying to hit multiple goals with this upcoming meeting. The first of our goals is to kind of continue this momentum around antimicrobial resistance that we saw from the UN General Assembly's high-level meeting on AMR that took place in September of 2024, and really kind of highlighting the commitments and resolutions that came out of that meeting. Our second goal may be of particular interest to you and harkens back to Sarah's talk, which is we're using this meeting to really provide input into the newest version of the US's CARB National Action Plan. The next iteration of the National Action Plan really directs U.S. government actions through 2030 and will be coming out hopefully within the next year. And it's really the federal roadmap for the next 5 years of actions of the federal government to combat AMR. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, this is a brief overview of kind of the topics that we'll be going over the 2 days in January and our hopes for how they'll inform the CARB National Action Plan. We're trying to be relatively forward thinking, seeing what's further out on the horizon, not just small wins, so we can really set a clear roadmap for domestic policy and global policy. So on day one, we've kind of bookended our discussions with 2 discussions on the UN General Assembly high-level meeting on AMR. The conversation that opens the day will take place with 4 of our international colleagues, where they'll kind of talk about the reactions to the high-level meeting and how they're hoping to address the commitments that came from the UN. We're also hosting a similar conversation at the end of day one, but the panelists will be U.S. federal representatives. So we'll kind of hear the domestic take on the UN commitments document on AMR. We also have 3 panels that day, the first of which will be kind of covering how AMR awareness is developed among the general population. We'll hear from 3 different polls that talk to individuals about their priority of AMR as a problem and how education can change that priority ranking for them. We'll also have a panel that explores the connection between the growing rates of AMR and crops in the environment and in agriculture, and then the risk that that poses to food security, both globally and domestically. And then our last panel on day one is really looking at how AMR is a threat to U.S. national security. So as rates of resistance increase, what threat does this pose to our healthcare system, to our disaster response capabilities, and our defense infrastructure? So that kind of rounds up day one. On day two, we also have 3 panels, the first of which is going to focus on ongoing data needs to understand the impact AMR has on U.S. animal agriculture, and then how we can expand that understanding beyond just a single domain of the One Health question and understand how impact on animal agriculture can potentially impact One Health holistically. The second panel is looking at how the economics of antibiotic markets pose a challenge for the successful production of new therapies. There's a decent number of incentives to help drive the research and development of antibiotics and antimicrobials in the US market, but we really kind of wanted to explore the other half of that development chain. So how can companies be successful after the development phase and through coming to market? And then our last panel on the second day is looking at how the utilization of artificial intelligence in the development of antimicrobials and diagnostics could potentially change what this process looks like and how a drug can be approved and come to market. And then, as always, as I mentioned previously, we'll be hosting our innovation spotlight and public comment periods, which are really the moments that you as individuals and experts can kind of directly interface with the council. Next slide, please. So we really kind of wanted just to end this presentation with what I would like to call a call to action to those of you listening today. We want to hear from you. Our role is to garner public input and to provide that to our federal colleagues as guidance. So this meeting in January is an opportunity for you to provide input on federal policy as it relates to AMR. So as you'll see on this slide here, our website, our email, and the ability to watch all of our meetings live there at watchlive.hhs.gov/live. Register for our meetings, either attend in person or virtually. Sign up for our public comments and our innovation spotlight so that you can directly address the council. We also have options for you to provide written public comment if the timing of our meetings don't work with you. If you have thoughts you'd like to share with the council, you can always email your comments to our members so that they can understand at that email address you see on the slide. I'd also like to note that while in this presentation we focused on our upcoming meeting in January, we host 2 to 3 public meetings a year. So there's always opportunities for you to provide your input and to have your voice heard by our council members and by the federal government as it relates to antimicrobial resistance policy. And I think that's it for everything that we had planned to cover with you all today. So thank you all for listening. And I think I hand it back to Amalia for our Q&A session.
All right, thank you all so much for a really informative presentation. There's a lot of information to go through. I knew some of it, but again, sort of hearing it all in one place, it's pretty amazing the amount of work that you all are doing and have done over the years. So I do have a couple of questions that came in before the webinar that I'm going to address really quickly, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Nicole Zimmerman to highlight any questions from the chat that we might want to pose to you and address. So I think the first one is very simple. Given that ASM does have a broad global membership, about half of our members are non-US based. Can non-US based scientists provide feedback to the PACCARB?
Absolutely. And so just to kind of give you a little bit more detail about our membership, we have 3 different categories of membership on the council. The first are considered special government employees that we bring in, and those have to be US citizens because they go through a very strict financial disclosure process to ensure that there's no conflict of interest. Okay, and they're considered special government employees, as I mentioned, and they are also the voting members on the council. The second category are liaison representatives, and these can be representatives of any organization or association that has a stake in AMR. We usually have a much shorter term for this category so that we have a 2-year rotation of different companies or organizations or whatever represented to ensure that everyone has a chance to be able to have a voice on the council. Everyone is treated the same between these 2 categories in terms of the feedback that's given and their ability to participate and give their input. However, it's the voting members that actually decide on the final recommendations, making it to the secretary, who in turn presents our recommendations to the president per our charter. The liaison representative category could be, as I mentioned, could be anyone. And we have had global participation. For example, Wellcome Trust was a member on the council. We're hoping to have another global organization be represented as well on the council in our next kind of turnover. And so that particular category, you're able to serve on the council as long as you're representing that association and you're chosen. The other way that you could actually participate is just send us your comments, send us your feedback. You have the website here and the email in particular, CARB, C-A-R-B at hhs.gov. It is our obligation under FACA to read every email that is directly related to AMR and share that with our council members and ensure that that feedback has been given to our chairs in particular. Also, your participation at the public meetings by signing up for the public comment or the Innovation Spotlight is welcome as well. We've had international companies sign up for the Innovation Spotlight to share in their technology, and there's no red tape around that. Anyone and everyone can participate. So hopefully that answers your question.
All right, thank you so much. Well, this one is a broader question, and I'll pose it to all 3 of you. What can ASM and our members do to increase awareness of PACCARB's recommendations?
Amazing question. So one of the areas also, I love that these questions are touching on things we didn't cover because we had to keep it tight. So, and Haley touched on this a little bit. So in addition to our main mission, which is providing feedback to the US government on how to optimize our efforts to combat resistance, the added value of the council is the fact that you can take our recommendations, ASM, IDSA, SHE, all the other organizations at some point in time over the past decade since our establishment have taken our recommendations for their own advocacy work. And I'm telling you, we have covered pretty much every topic related to AMR so far, but I'm sure there's a lot more that we can address over the next year or so as it relates to either stewardship, environmental health. It's just a very, very broad range of topic areas related to antimicrobial resistance. So you can take our recommendations, some of the infographics that you saw in the slides that we used as well were purposefully done. If you'll notice in our reports as you go through them on our website that's on here, you'll see that we summarize things in an executive summary with an infographic that is a depiction of our recommendations in a beautiful little diagram that you can actually just copy and paste for your own purposes and cite back and refer to in your own work.
Wonderful, thank you. And then finally, one quick question before I turn it over to Nicole. Well, hopefully quick. We are receiving this question a lot from our members since the US presidential election. So will the change in presidential administration impact your work on PACCARB?
So great question, because we always ask ourselves the same thing. The good news is that we have survived 3 presidential administrations, and we will continue hopefully to function because we have been supported through these 3 presidential administrations. We were established under the Obama administration initially. We were further supported by the previous Trump administration by our inclusion in legislation and law. And under the Biden administration, luckily, there have been additional funds that have been allocated towards AMR. And we are looking forward to the new administration, hopefully recognizing the value of antimicrobial resistance and ensuring that our work is fully supported and also provides the same level, if not more, support to the government regarding this topic in particular.
Thank you so much for clarifying for us. Nicole, is there anything from the chat that we'd like to share or ask?
Yeah, I have one question I would like to raise. There's a question that came in. If you're a federal scientist, so for example, someone who works at CDC or NIH, they were wondering if there are any rules that prohibit participating or speaking during these public meetings.
All right, great question again, because I forgot to tell you about the 3rd category of membership that we have on the council, which is representation on behalf of the agencies. So we have HHS seats, DoD seats, and USDA seats that are considered support. These are federal government employees that provide input and information to the council members to help augment and fill in the gaps of what the council needs to know about the current federal work related to AMR. These are usually assigned by certain offices that are dedicated to AMR within those agencies and departments. However, that does not preclude you from providing comment during the public comment period if you are not a representative of that agency or department, or giving that verbal comment either live publicly, as long as you're okay with that, or by sending us a written note to the CARB at hhs.gov. So there is no restriction on feedback or input provided. And as a fellow federal employee under HHS, you can just look me up in Global and send me a note and tell me what your concerns are. And that's probably the easiest way.
We have another question that came. I think we've already sort of hit on some of this, but it's asking, how are you collaborating globally with others? So I was wondering if you could speak maybe about your relationships with the WHO or any international bodies or institutions.
Absolutely. So, over the course of 10 years, we hosted a lot of meetings. And in the process of hosting those meetings, we've also engaged with a range of subject matter experts. And a lot of them are in the international arena and nonprofit associations and non-government organizations. We have worked very closely with PAHO, the WHO, with EMRO in particular as well. And so we wanted to make sure that continued engagement, not just by us, by virtue of us inviting speakers to speak about their work and their level of expertise, but we've also taken the show on the road. And we've been invited to speak at different fora globally as well. We've spoken, we've presented at ESCMID. We've presented at the One Health Congress, twice now over the course of our time. We've presented at ISAC. And I know I'm saying all these acronyms because I cannot tell you what they stand for. And even if I try, I will probably mess it up. But our engagement has kind of been a push and pull mechanism where we kind of pull in people, but we also make sure that our work, particularly the council's reports and recommendations and us seeking out the different voices externally was also strong as well. And people globally are aware of our work.
Okay, thank you. I only have one other question in the Q&A in Zoom, and that is just, can you share the slides?
We would be happy to. Let's just give us a chance to get them PDF'd and approved by our people, and we'll be able to share those with the ASM, and then you're able to send them broadly if that helps.
Sounds good. And I see another question that just came in on the chat. It says, what about collaborating with international WHMIS?
It's great, but I don't know what a WHMIS
I don't
is.
either.
Lisa N, you gotta spell it out. I have no idea what that means.
And another question that came in, does PACCARB play a role in direct bilateral engagement on AMR programs in different countries?
So our main mission is to advise the US federal government, right? So we don't really provide any input directly in terms of actions and recommendations to the government other than the fact that we need there to be a global presence and for us to work collaboratively, speaking a lot to the report that Kaylee just presented on the United Front. So that's our main mission. Now, we are more than happy if any federal, international government or international body takes our recommendations for their own purposes, because everything and anything we do is in the public domain. So if you go to our website, it is a repository of information and resources about everything we've done over the past 10 years in terms of every single presentation to date, the slides that have been used by those presenters as well, our reports, our recommendations, minutes from those meetings as well. So hopefully you can get all the data that you need from the website, and we make sure that it is consistently up to date so that people can seek what they need.
Another question in the chat, it says, are you able to share any more on how the panels are shaping up so far? Will there be audience participation in them? I think that's referring to the upcoming meeting.
The public meeting. So our panels are pretty much closed out thanks to the diligent efforts of Ms. Haley Krem and her amazing agenda setting skills. And so we've reached out to quite a few presenters. We have a lot of panelists that are going to be joining us both in person and hybrid. Keeping in mind the purpose of the meeting is to help inform the council, and this will also be streamed live on hhs.gov/live1. The Q&A will only be dedicated to the council members. There will not be an opportunity for the general public to participate. However, if you do join in person, that doesn't preclude you from going up to a presenter and asking them respectfully as a follow-up, or if you want to develop a relationship, because really coming into the meeting is a tremendous networking opportunity altogether, because you get to meet federal entities, the presenters that are there, other council members, and it's a great chance for you to kind of discuss things. I want to pause for a second and give Haley and Sarah an opportunity to provide some feedback as well to anything I've already covered.
I just wanted to quickly add that the agenda with the panel members will be posted online and publicly available prior to the meeting. So you also will know who will be presenting and what topic on specifically.
Sarah stole my thunder. It was exactly what I was going to say, but I will say that it is online now with all of the panelists' names. So if you're interested in who will be speaking and placeholder titles of what they will be talking on within the panels, please go to our website. It's all available on our public meeting page for the January meeting.
It's a really, really good meeting, and I'm not just saying that because I run the show, but at the same time, we've worked very hard to make sure that the panels are diverse. We cover a range of topics for this meeting because we want to make sure that we start off the year very, very strong. And so if you're not able to join us in person, it'll be in Arlington, Virginia. Please be sure to log in. The stream is very clear. We do our best to make sure that the visual is wonderful and the sound is great. But we can't, Murphy's Law sometimes kicks in with these things. So if you hear any snafus, feel free to send us an email and tell us, I can't hear you. And so we can fix it right away.
There's another question that came in the Q&A. Could you share some of your favorite ways / successes you've seen your work reflected in policy changes? For example, seeing a particular policy come to life or convincing doubtful policymakers, etc.
That's a great one. So I will tell you from what I think are the best successes, because I helped establish the council in 2015. One of the biggest accomplishments that we had is ensure that the subject matter experts that work in the different domains finally have a very strong and full appreciation of the other's work. So in the beginning, when we were first established, we had, the human health and the animal health subject matter experts sitting together at the same table in 2015. And I will say it was uncomfortable at first, because there was a level of doubt between, if there was any sort of conflict of interest or any sort of hidden agenda. But what ended up happening was the relationship building and the collaboration that grew, that now at this point, there is an incredibly strong appreciation between the human health and agricultural health and the environmental health domains, that we can't have any sort of report or recommendation or discussion on an item unless they actually seek advice from each other. So that for us was a very broad, huge success because it kind of set the path of how we tackle topics and how we approach the range of discussion items. In terms of confirming what our impact has been, it's very difficult to say that we were exactly the cause or direct influence on this. But for example, we did push forward a few what are called resolution letters that are one subject topic areas that are recommendations. One of them was ensuring that the council is included in legislation. And we know that ASM took our one-page resolution and further pushed for advocacy so that the PACCARB not only exists in executive order, but also in legislation under PAPA. The significance of the council existing in PAPA is that it takes the topic of AMR in particular from a public health domain into a biosecurity and biodefense context. And those are two very different areas and have very different pots of money and attention. So that was a huge win for ASM to actually take our work and ensure that it's included in the Pandemic and All Hazards Preparedness Act.
I think we're starting to run up on time, so I'm going to hand it back over to Amalia to close it.
Can I say one more thing?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, real quick. We're going to be there in June. So for those of you that are going to be at ASM in June in Los Angeles, please be sure to look up the agenda for whenever we land on in terms of our sessions, and we hope to meet you and see you in person. We may have some goodies, we'll see, depends on our funding, but hopefully if you're able to join us, you'll learn a little bit more about our council, about our work, and we'll definitely have a lot more to discuss, especially after the meeting that we have towards the end of this month. And a big, round of applause for ASM and IDSA joining forces for 2026. And we're really, really, really looking forward to that.
Thank you, Jomana. And that happens to be our next slide. I was just going to put in a quick plug for the ASM IDSA conference that will be coming up early next year. Date and location to be determined, but we do hope that many of you can join us. Thank you to my team, Nicole and Kalk, who are on this call, who organized this webinar. And thank you so much to our presenters, Haley, Jomana, Sarah, for your time and efforts today. And thank you to all of our participants for your attention and for your wonderful questions. This webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to the ASM website once we get all the clearances and everything organized. We do invite you to join the PACCARB staff at ASM Microbe this year. I had a plug-in for that as well, Jomana, but we anticipate seeing you on the AAR Track Hub. I think that is where we will find you all with like-minded folks working on antimicrobial resistance. And then as far as ASM advocacy goes, we do encourage anyone on this call to stay up to date with ASM's policy and advocacy activities by signing up for our newsletter. So we do have a link to that in the chat, and you can email us anytime at advocacy@asmusa.org. All right, thank you all so much for joining today's webinar, and we hope to speak with you all soon. Have a wonderful week.